And let me just make sure there's nobody in the waiting room. Okay, so welcome to the Poudre River Fest. This is day one of our 4-day series this year. So we are mixing it up a little bit for the Poudre River Fest. Traditionally, we have a one-day in-person event. This year, we're actually doing hybrid. So we have 4 days of programming spanning 4 months. So today, May 7th, is our wildlife theme. And we are so glad to have the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies here with us today, presenting on birding and eBird. Just to let everybody know, the Poudre River Fest is organized by 6 organizations in the nonprofit community in Fort Collins, and you'll see all of those organizations listed here. And proceeds from the Poudre River Fest go to support restoration projects on the Cache La Poudre River. So you can donate at poudreriverfest.org. And then at our August 21st event, which will be our big in-person event this year, hopefully we will be announcing what that particular project is. And it will be related to restoring areas of the Poudre that were affected by the Cameron Peak fire. So I am going to now pass it on to Tyler and let him give us a great presentation on birding and eBird.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. I'm excited to be here, and I hope that most of you will take away at least something from this presentation. My goal is just to inspire everyone really to get outside and to pay a little bit closer attention to the birds around us. So I'm going to share my screen, which I feel like is just in our vocabulary of saying now, which is funny. All right. Great. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar all about birding for yourself and science, or just birding and eBird is kind of the short name that I sent. So my name is Tyler Cash, and I am the Camp and Community Coordinator for the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. And I'm excited to be here virtually to present for the Poudre River Fest. I've actually never attended it in person. I actually live down south near Denver, but I hope one of these days I'll be able to get up there for an in-person Poudre River Fest. So I'll be your presenter today. We'll be focusing on how we as bird enthusiasts, or bird nerds as I call myself, how we can contribute our sightings to science, to a scientific database, but while also satisfying our own desire of birds and birding, because I think birding can be a little selfish, but there's an easy tool that we can use to make sure that what we're doing can also benefit the greater community as a whole. I also like to do a little bit of virtual birding during my webinars, just to make it kind of fun and to see where you all are at. So at the end of this presentation, we will be working to identify some species that can be seen along the Poudre River area, or just in Colorado in general. And migration is slowly starting this year, but it's starting to ramp up. I keep seeing that there's more reports of some migratory species coming through. So I hope that after this presentation, you get inspired to get out there and enjoy this beautiful day today, and maybe even the rainy weekend. If you have any questions that come up during this webinar, I do want to keep this as interactive as possible. Please use the chat feature. I have one of my employees, Wyatt. He'll be monitoring that chat window, and he'll be answering a lot of questions that come up. So please use that as much as you can. I love trying to interact as much as I can with our participants, even if you can't unmute. So I wanted to present on birding for yourself in science, because I think at the core of conservation of any species, we have to foster a love for any species before we can actually begin conserving it. If you're not into birds, if you don't take the time to get to know them or love them, I don't think you're going to be real driven to help conserve them. But I feel like once we start to fall in love, once we have a passion, especially with birds, once we start noticing them more, and once we can start identifying them, we will want to help conserve them. And that's kind of what this presentation will be about today. And luckily for us, birds are everywhere. So this can be done even from the comfort of your own home. If you like to be a homebody and not get out as much, you can still be a birder. So here's a little picture of myself. My name again is Tyler Cash, and I am the camp and community coordinator. So my job at Bird Conservancy is, for one, I run our summer bird camps, which we also do in the winter as well. So I get to teach people from 4 to 17 in a camp setting all about birds and the work that we do. It's really fun. If you have any kiddos that would like to join a bird camp and become little bird nerds, send them my way. But I also work with the community as well and make sure that not just our next generation, but all people can be birders and can help with conservation. So I'll be your main presenter, and then, like I said earlier, Wyatt, he's actually one of our summer camp instructors this year who just started with us. He's going to be monitoring that chat, so he'll be asking or answering any questions. He might ask some questions to you as well, and he'll be definitely able to answer these because he is an avid birder and definitely an avid eBirder. So we'll be talking a little bit about what eBird is later in this presentation. So I just want to go over some Zoom buttons. I'm sure we're all experts when it comes to Zoom now. I know I didn't even hear about Zoom until last year, and now we use it all the time. So it takes a little playing around with. If this is your first time using it, you are all muted. You can talk as loud as you want, and we won't hear you. Your videos are also off, and that just helps our technology run a little bit smoother. And it also allows us to not get too distracted with background noise. Like I said, we'll be interacting through that chat button. So if you can see on my screen, there's that little green circle. If you hit that chat function, it should dock your chat on the side of this presentation. And that'll make it a little easier for you to ask questions. When I was full screen, you probably went full screen as well. If you want that chat window docked, all you have to do is exit that full screen by either pushing escape or exit full screen. And if you have any questions about chat or about Zoom in general, if you're having technical difficulties, I'm sure someone can help you out in the chat function. So we're going to start this program the same way I start all of my programs, whether they're virtual or in person. And that's by getting to know all of you out in the world just a little bit better. So let's see if we can use this chat box. So what I want you to do is type in where you're from, so where you are at today. What was the last really cool bird that you saw? I know it's spring and summer is coming and birds are moving through. So please type into the chat where you're zooming from and the last really cool bird that you saw. For me, I am currently in Westminster, Colorado. And the last really cool bird that I saw, actually I had a Swainson hawk flying overhead the other day at my house, which was cool. Wyatt, yeah, I think he told me he saw the rock wren yesterday. Maria, Western kingbirds, they're making their way back, which is great. Gail, that's okay if you don't know the coolest bird you saw. Hopefully, maybe you'll find one today. That's really cool. A bald eagle, Katie, that's awesome. I love seeing bald eagles. Nice, Allison. Great blue herons are, again, all birds are my favorite birds, I guess. But it's great to see that people are noticing the birds around them because there's a lot of species out there and birds are everywhere. So thank you for using that chat button. House wrens, yes, and hummingbirds. Thank you, Pamela and Anna, for filling that out. I'm glad everyone has figured out how to use the chat button, and I'm glad that you all are seeing birds. All right. So if this is your first program with the Bird Conservancy, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of us before, hopefully. If not, I just want to tell you a little bit about what we do. So Bird Conservancy, our mission is to conserve birds and their habitats. And we do this with an integrated approach of science, education, and land stewardship. So we have this three-pronged approach that help us accomplish this mission. So we have our science team. They're out there advancing knowledge, collecting data, learning basically all we can learn about birds, really taking that knowledge to the next level. And they're writing publications. They're using really cool science databases and just helping us learn more so we can conserve birds. Our stewardship team, they work with private land, private ranchers all throughout the Great Plains region and into the Rockies. And since a lot of land is owned privately, we try to work with those ranchers to make sure that their land they're good stewards of their land, and they're making sure that their land is good for birds and other animals as well. But also we want to help benefit those ranchers as well. So we work with them closely. And then the education team, which I'm a part of, and so is Wyatt. All we try to do is educate folks. I like to say that my job is really to just get people excited about birds. And that's what I get paid to do. And that's what I love to do. So without the education component, we won't really know what we're doing out there in the science field or what our stewardship folks are doing. And that's why we use this three-prong approach. And then our work, it radiates all across the breeding, wintering, and migratory ranges of birds. So we work from all the way up in Wyoming and into Canada, all the way down into Mexico. So we really want to learn what birds are doing at their wintering, their summering, and also during their migratory routes. And then with this virtual platform, this last couple of years, our work has actually radiated outside of America, and we have had webinar attendees from Europe and from Mexico, which is pretty cool. So what will we be learning in this webinar? We're going to be learning about the diversity of songbirds, how we can classify them and how many there are. We're also going to be learning how we can kind of get away from backyard birding and how to find some of those trickier birds that we probably don't see in our backyards. We're going to learn how we as citizens or as people of Earth, how we can become a community scientist and how our birding, what we do and what we contribute can be a part of something bigger. And then we will have some fun towards the end to identify some of those fun songbirds and those cool species that hopefully we've been seeing. So this picture is actually a picture of pre-COVID times, the last time we ran our overnight summer camp back in 2019. And this is just a fond memory for me. Our scientist, Arvin, came up for a day of birding with our kiddos, with our campers. We went along Trail Ridge Road up in Rocky Mountain National Park. He was showing us and teaching us all about rosy finches and peregrine falcons. And even we got out there and spotted some white-tailed ptarmigan. So again, our stewardship, our science and education folks, we all try our best to work together in this organization, which is great. So hopefully you've heard about this 7 simple actions. If not, I'm going to be talking about it a little bit more today. So the 7 simple actions are steps that everybody can take to help birds. These actions actually came out of the 3 billion birds lost study that our avian conservation scientist, Arvind, who was in that last picture birding with us, Arvind Punjabi, he co-authored that study, and it's out in the Science Journal. And it was published back, in October 2019 now, which seems like ages ago. But all this information is still really relevant for us. So that study that came out, it shows how we've lost nearly 3 billion birds in North America since 1970. And with this alarming study, we want to make sure that we can educate folks on what we can all do to help make sure that we don't lose 3 billion more in the coming years, and that birds are actually hopefully start thriving instead of declining. So today we're actually going to take a deeper dive into one of these simple actions, and we're going to be talking about watching birds, but also sharing what we see. That's going to be our theme for today. All right. So I always add this slide to my presentations. I think it's really important to understand why birds. Why is Bird Conservancy of the Rockies an organization that focuses on birds? Or why does Audubon do that? Why are there so many organizations that focus on birds? Well, for one, they are environmental indicators. So they're one of the first group of animals that will be affected by environmental changes. They're also an ecosystem service. So they provide us with services such as pest control and seed dispersal. I know when I'm out camping or out in the mountains and there's a lot of mosquitoes, I hope that there's some insect-eating birds around me that can make sure that I'm not getting eaten alive and that they're providing protein for birds. Birds are also extremely inspirational. They inspire us with artwork to engineering. Birds have inspired us for as long as humans have been around. But one point I really like to stress is that birds are extremely accessible. So no matter where you live in the city, you can live in the mountains, you can live along a river, you can live in an apartment in an urban area. No matter where you are, you can find birds. I know when I work at home or when I'm at the office, I'm constantly looking out the window, looking at birds. So they're extremely accessible, which allow us to educate people about them. They're not some like foreign species that we never see. They're around us at all times. So how many birds are there? There's so many birds out there in the world. There's approximately 10,000 species throughout in the whole world on Earth. And in North America alone, we have around 1,000 species that can be seen at different times of year. In Colorado, where all of us are from currently today, there can be around 507 different species seen in our state alone. We do have kind of a variety of habitats, which is really helpful. And in a Bar Lake State Park, which is where the headquarters of the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies is located, it is definitely a birding hotspot, and it's a great place to work. There's been around 350 different species identified at Bar Lake. So if you've never been there, I highly encourage it. It's a great place to go birding and to just enjoy nature in general. So birding really is a lifelong hobby. I think if you get into it, you'll probably do it for the rest of your life in some capacity. And if you feel like you're getting bored, go to another state, go to the other side of the country, or go abroad to a whole different country. And that spark will get reignited by seeing new birds that you haven't seen before. So during this presentation, I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on the passerine group, which we consider songbirds. Songbirds and passerines kind of go hand in hand. And they make up the majority of our birding checklists. So what we generally refer to as songbirds, they compose the order of the passerines. So this huge order actually includes over more than half of all the bird species. So there's around 6,000 different groups of passerines in the world. In Colorado specifically, where we all are, there are approximately 175 birds that we classify as passerines or as songbirds that can be seen sometime during any year. And if we add in some rarities that find their way to Colorado, we're talking about a lot of different birds that we need to sort out in order to identify them. So some characteristics that are specific to passerines is they have those anisodactyl arrangement of toes. So they have 3 facing forward and 1 facing back. And this allows those birds to cling easily to almost anything. It could be your gutters, it could be trees, it could be small branches. They also have a very distinct vocal organ that allows them to make those beautiful songs that I wake up to every morning, and that hopefully you all wake up to as well. Sometimes they're not as beautiful as we would like, but it's something that is an adaptation that is specific to passerines. And then their appearance varies very greatly. You can have a common raven, which is in the passerine family, all the way down to a little tiny kinglet, which are really different sizes of birds, and they also look completely different, which I think is pretty cool. So there's a lot of families among the passerine order. So all members of a species nearly always share some similar plumage and color detail. Males and females, adult and young, nearly all of these species share some kind of characteristic size, structure, and habits that contribute to the overall look of the species. So as birders, we like to start by grouping up different families of birds. And that's a great way to help us identify birds. So, you might be seeing a flycatcher, but you're not sure what species it is. But you know that it's a flycatcher based on that structure and the size of that bird. Or you might be looking at a warbler and you know that it's a warbler, but you're not quite sure what species it is. These families and that look, the overall look of that family will help us narrow that down. And I personally think that the passerine family, these species of birds are some of the most challenging to identify, but they're also the most exciting to see because most of them are migratory and leave the state during the spring, or leave during the fall and come back during the spring. So how do we take that next step, like I said earlier, from identifying common birds that we see in our backyards or our local parks to going out to find some more uncommon birds or taking our birding kind of outside of our bubble near our houses? And one way we can do that is by exploring different habitats. So a habitat is a home where animals live. And luckily in Colorado, we have a big variety of those different types of habitats. So if you go out and explore different types of habitat, maybe up in the mountains or along rivers, you will see a larger variety of birds than just being in your backyard, unless you live on a really great area and have a huge backyard with rivers and everything like that. So in the chat, I want to hear from you all. What is your favorite habitat to either go out and explore in, or your favorite habitat to go out and go birding in. I personally really enjoy wetland areas, or riparian zones, so areas along a river like the Poudre River. Um, Personally, because I love water, and I feel like you get a larger diversity of species around water. Yeah, wetlands, Marie. Thank you. Yeah, wetlands. Wetlands are great places to bird. We get a larger variety of birds. Riparian. I'm with you, Katie. I love riparian zones. Um, Thank you all for sharing. I love just learning a little bit more about people, even though it's via chat. So again, there's a whole bunch of different areas that we can go birding, and that's going to help you narrow down what kind of species you're seeing. So uncommon birds, or mostly migratory birds, most of the time can be a little bit harder to spot than our backyard birds. I say that, and most of the rare birds that I've gone looking for, I usually find in the parking lot. But for the majority of birds, like migratory birds and passerines, they can be a little harder to spot. They're usually a little more secretive, or definitely a lot more camouflage. So one tip that I like to give when we're getting outside of our backyards and we're exploring new areas, is taking the time to go birding, and even taking that time to just wait in certain areas. Whenever I personally stop in an area that I think, maybe I heard some bird songs or some bird calls, I think it might be a birdie place to wait. I'll sit and just wait for like 15 or more minutes, and let the birds come to me. If we're moving really quickly, we're going to miss a lot of species, because we're moving a little too quickly, and we might not notice them. So if we just sit and wait, they will probably come to you. So 2 summers ago, actually, at one of our summer bird camps, this memory just always comes in my head when I think about waiting. Especially with kids, they want to keep moving all the time. So having us just sit and wait can be a challenge. But 2 summers ago at one of our bird camps, I was with 5 other campers, and we stopped in this willow thicket, like along a trail that we were on, and we heard a lot of bird chatter. So I was like, all right, let's just wait and see what comes to us. And we waited, and we were pretty still, and mountain bikers came flying by, and people came flying by us, but we waited. And it was right after a rain, and we stood still for a while, and we actually had the opportunity to identify like 10 different species of birds, just in that one little area that we waited in. And most of those birds that we saw were life birds. They were birds that those campers have never identified before. So taking that time and waiting for the birds to come to you would be a big tip that I would give you all. So this brings up a great question of how exactly do we find good birding spots? Where can we go where there's a large variety of birds? And that brings us to the wonderful world of eBird. So if you've never heard of it, eBird is this wonderful database that is managed by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And eBird as a whole allows you to do so many different things. And it can help you find more birds in your area. It allows you to keep track of your bird lists. You can add photos and sounds to your profile. It allows you to explore the latest sightings from around the world. You can nerd out in different places around the world with eBird. It's also one of the largest birding communities out there because it is worldwide. And it also allows you to contribute to science and conservation. So the goal for eBird is to gather all of this information in the form of checklists, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. Checklists of birds, they archive it, and then they freely share it to everyone to power new data-driven approaches to science, conservation, and education. So eBird is the largest biodiversity-related science project in the world. It's huge. There are more than 100 million different bird observations submitted to eBird every year. And since this whole pandemic, they've actually been growing even more because more people are spending the time out in nature and birding. And for one, they also they provide the birding community with the most current and useful information related to birds. So eBird has really changed the way that we bird. I know it makes it a lot more accessible. It makes it a little easier to find what we're looking for. And while eBird was around when I first started birding many years ago, I didn't have a smartphone. There was no app or anything that was around. It was just a database. But just like with any other source of technology, I personally like to think of eBird as a tool. And this tool allows us to further our knowledge. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into eBird and see how we can use this tool to become better birders ourselves. So eBird hotspots, it's a fantastic resource to help us kind of find where birds are located. So you can view the eBird hotspots either on the eBird website at ebird.org, or you can actually, they just came out with an eBird hotspot app that you can download on your smartphone. So a hotspot is an area where there have been eBird checklists submitted, usually a large amount of checklists. So the colors are based on the number of species observed in those areas. So if we look at this picture, we can see those different colors. Gray, if you see the color gray, that's a low number of species recorded. Either there's just not a lot of people going there to bird, or maybe there's just not a lot of birds there in general. And that goes all the way up to the dark red color, which would be like 500 different species or more. So this is an amazing database to have if you consider yourself a birder or a bird enthusiast. You can look at different hotspots around the world. You can use it in your backyard, or you can use it on your yearly trip abroad. I know I use these hotspots to plan a lot of trips that I go on to see where I can find the most birds. So when you click on one of those hotspots, those hotspot location, this little screen pops up. So you can view details. If you click that view details button, that will bring you to a new page, and that will show you the most recent checklists, or all the checklists really that have been submitted, as well as some other useful information. So I use this when I go birding in a new area and want to see exactly what people have been seeing. So on this one, I clicked on the Colorado State University Environmental Learning Center, which is along the Poudre River. And you can see at that spot, there have been 258 different species seen year round, and there's been over 2,000 checklists submitted for that one area. So if I lived in Fort Collins, I would go here to go birding to try to find a good amount of birds, because this shows us that there have been a lot of people birding there, and it's along the Poudre River. So as far as hotspots go, I would say play around on the website a little bit. If you go to ebird.org, you'll click on the science button, and you can explore different hotspots based on that. So I'm curious, type into the chat, has anyone never submitted an eBird checklist before? So don't be ashamed, we're here to learn about eBird checklists. So type in the chat if you've never submitted one before. We'll see. All right. Yeah, Allison uses the data all the time, which we'll talk a little bit more about that data soon. Katie, she's not. Awesome, it's great. I'm glad that we have some people that have not used eBird, so you're here to learn about it. So again, eBird, like Allison said, you can use it for data, or you could use it just to submit checklists. So there's a lot of different things that we can use eBird for, and submitting checklists is just one of those things. So we talked about how we can use eBird to find areas. So I would suggest going to the eBird website and just kind of playing around with it. There's a lot of really great useful tools on it, and that will help you find places. But we're here to kind of talk a little bit more about community science. So now I want to talk to you more about that part of eBird. So the definition of a community scientist, or maybe you've heard the term citizen scientist, that they're interchanged. So that is a member of the general public, so just like any one of us, who collects and analyzes data relating to the natural world, typically as part of a collaborative project with professional scientists. So eBird uses professional scientists, and that is the database that we can submit our checklist to. So as birders, as general public, our observations are greatly appreciated by the scientific community. Like Allison said, she uses the data in her work. She works for the Bird Conservancy. So it's really helpful to the scientific community. So by submitting checklists into eBird, we help scientists answer questions about bird abundance. So how many birds people are seeing in certain areas. So at the core of eBird, all you really need to do to enter a checklist is enter when you're birding, where you're birding, and how you went birding. So you could use this on the app. So I love the eBird app, which this is a picture of it. It's a free app that you can download. And the app I always have my phone on me. So I use the app more than I use the website nowadays. So what you do is you're going to click start new checklist. So there's just that button right there with the wren on it. And once you start that new checklist, it's going to ask you a couple questions. It's mostly going to upload the most common birds that you should see based on your location. And once you have that, then you can go and start birding. You can also allow it to track where you're going. So it'll show you how far you walked, which is something that you do have to enter into eBird. You have to let them know how you're birding. So if you're traveling, it could be incidental. So you can enter checklists based, let's say I'm just walking around, not birding, and Swainson's hawk, or let's say like a golden eagle flies overhead, and I get really, really excited. I'm not out birding, but I can enter an incidental report saying that I saw that, but I'm not actually birding. So with eBird, we want to try our best to enter the amount of birds that we identify. So you can see this checklist that I submitted last year, just a really brief checklist I did at Chatfield. And you can see the different numbers of birds along with identifying that bird. So it could be from 1 to thousands. I've entered some checklists with like 6,000 common mergansers one winter. So we have to count the bird species that we see. eBird will allow you to enter an X if you're just a little too overwhelmed by counting birds. But numbers are way better than an X. An X really means nothing. It could mean that there is one of that species, or it could mean that there's a million of that species. So if you really want to enter the most up-to-date data, and for something that will go to a database, please try your best to make an assumption of how many birds you're seeing. It's okay if it's not 100% correct, but try your best to get down how many you're seeing. You can also share these checklists. So let's say I was going out birding with Wyatt and I didn't feel like having my eBird app open. I would delegate him to be the eBirder. And then at the end, he can share that checklist with me since we saw all the same birds together. If you're out and you swear that you see a species that isn't on the list, it might be a rare bird. So if you find a rare bird and you're sure, you will flag that bird and you will have to enter more details about it. And then it'll be reviewed by a regional expert for likelihood of that observation. So if you're saying that you saw like a penguin along the Poudre River and you're certain about it, you really have to have the right details or a photo of that for it to actually get entered into the database. And again, you can add pictures to this. You can add just details. I know a lot of us might be more into like wildlife photography. Pictures always help when you're entering birds into this database. So I learn by doing. So I highly suggest you to download this app and get out somewhere today or this weekend and try to do a checklist. It's pretty straightforward. The app has made things a lot easier. It's free and it is really user friendly. And I actually usually go birding for longer when I'm doing an eBird checklist because it is kind of like a game. You want to see how many species you get. You want to see how many individuals you see, and it'll keep track of all of your life list. And these checklists are what scientists will use to determine abundance. So if you have more questions about the eBird checklist, you can enter that into the chat, or we can talk a little bit about it later as well. But I want to talk a little bit more about all of this data that we get from eBird. So I talked a little bit earlier about the study that came out about nearly 3 billion birds lost. So the checklists that you submit on eBird, they are used in a variety of research projects. So you can actually go on the eBird website and you can find each publication that's ever used eBird data. It's a really daunting list, but it shows you just how much scientists actually use this data that we enter. So again, I'm sure we are either familiar or have heard of the study that was published in the journal Science that came out in the end of 2019, all about 2.9 billion birds lost since 1970. So how exactly did these scientists gather this information? So they actually used data the data from 48 years of multiple independent sources of community science databases. So these scientists were looking at data that was entered into the North American Breeding Bird Survey. They're looking at data that was entered into Audubon's Christmas bird count every year. And they also used eBird data along with other monitoring initiatives to help them determine that we have, in fact, lost 2.9 billion birds since 1970. So if you entered a checklist at some point in North America since 1970, they could have used your actual checklist to determine this number. So the more eBird checklists that we submit, or if you ever go on a Christmas bird count, this data will better help scientists understand about bird abundance and what's happening, and help us come out with bird conservation efforts. So again, eBird is a great tool that we use. For our scientists use it to look at the data, but I use it to submit data as well, just as a general public member. All right, I have talked a lot, and now I want to get to the portion that I talked about earlier, the virtual birding portion. So if you have a field guide with you, that's great, or you can use your phone to identify some birds, but I have some pictures that I'll pull up, and we'll try our best to identify them through the chat. If you, like I said earlier, the Passerine family is really large, the order of Passerines, and if you just know the family, that's great as well. Feel free to enter that. If you know it right away, maybe hold back a little bit and let some others have a chance to look it up. Don't just say it right away. I know I get really excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a house wren. But we try to hold back sometimes. And if you don't want it spoiled, if you really do want to kind of work through these species, you can always hide or ignore the chat while it's up. And again, these are just pictures of birds, so it's really hard to determine size. They're not to scale. I don't have any videos. So it's not that easy, but we'll try our best to identify some species that you all can see if you go walking along the Poudre River at some point during the spring or the summer. So before we do that, I just want to talk about some steps that we use to identify birds. So I use this checklist. If you're a birder, you probably use some kind of checklist too. This is just kind of ingrained in my mind nowadays. But when I was first learning how to bird, these were the steps that I went through to help me identify a bird. So the first thing that you want to do is locate that bird. You can't really identify a bird unless you find one. And luckily with virtual birding, these birds aren't going to fly away. So we have some time to look at them. When I'm looking at a bird, I want to figure out what size is that bird. And I compare that size to birds that are common. So is that bird the size of a robin? Is it the size of a goose? Or maybe it's the size of a hawk. That'll help you narrow it down based on size. And then what is the most noticeable thing that you notice about that bird? So if we're looking at a bird that is really bright blue, like maybe a mountain bluebird, the most noticeable thing to me would be that striking blue. So it could be color, it could be shape, it could be like the crest of a Steller's jay. So we want to figure out what's that field mark that we're looking for. And then you want to observe the bird's shape. So I usually start with the head and then work my way down. So if there's like an eye ring around the eye, or a crest or a crown, or something about its face, and then does it have wing bars? Are there like white stripes along its wings? Does it have a long tail or a short tail or a forked tail? It's really, really important to observe all of those different features of birds. And once you've looked at the kind of the overall shape, you understand what it looks like. Then you want to watch about that bird's behavior. What is that bird doing? Because different birds are adapted to behave differently. If it's a duck or some kind of waterfowl, its behavior would be it's on a body of water. If it's something maybe like a hermit thrush or something, it's probably going to be on the ground or in a lower tree and being kind of foraging through the ground. So looking at that behavior is going to really help you narrow it down. And while you're looking at that behavior, it's also going to be helpful to know what habitat you're in. So I saw a lot of us like to go birding along wetlands. So a wetland would be your habitat. You're more likely to see birds that use wetlands as their home. Or if you're birding out in the prairie, you're probably going to see more of grassland species of birds. And then it's important to know what time of year it is. Every field guide will have a range map, and that range map is going to show you where that bird can be seen during different times of the year. So if you're looking at a swallow here in Colorado in the midst of winter, and you could swear it's a swallow, your field guide might say that it probably isn't, because those swallows probably migrated down because they need to find their food where there's insects, and there's not many insects here in Colorado in winter unless the birds are adapted to find those insects. So these are just steps, again, that I use. The more that you become familiar with identifying birds, this checklist just becomes ingrained in your head. But if you are just starting out, if you consider yourself a beginner birder, this is really helpful to take the time to identify a bird. All right, so I hope your typing fingers are ready. We are ready for our first round of birds. And it could be one bird, it could be two birds, it could be male or female. I try to make it a little challenging, but not too challenging. All of these birds you can see in Colorado. So here is our first birds. So feel free to type it in the chat. You can either put like top or bottom if you want to identify them that way. I've actually been starting to see these. These are migratory birds. Nice. Maria noticed right away that these are swallows. So it's always great to identify first based on their family, and then you can get down to species a little later on. Do we think these birds, do you think this is one species of bird? Do we think these are two different species of birds? What are we observing on them? What colors stand out to you? Looks like Pamela has got it. She's probably been seeing these, hopefully. You can find these around different bodies of water. Yeah, great job. Thank you all for using the chat function. I know it's hard, especially if you type all day, but again, you just type in one little thing. So what we have here is we have two different types of swallows. The top one is a tree swallow, and the bottom one is a violet green swallow. So some field marks that I look for, because these look pretty similar, especially in the field, they can look a lot more similar. The field marks that I look for right away is that white. So you can see with the tree swallow where its eye is located. The white is below its eye. And if you look at the violet green swallow, that white goes above the eye. So that's a great field mark to look at if they're perched and they're not flying really fast. But if they are flying really fast, kind of catching those insects off the water, some other field marks to look for is this white patch on the violet green swallow right above its rump. And then you can see it on that tree swallow. It's all kind of uniform bluish green on the top. They are really beautiful birds. And you're most likely to see these near water. So you like to think about that habitat. But swallow identification can be extremely difficult. Here in Colorado, we can see almost every species of swallow in like one location. You can see most of them. They fly really fast. And if you're trying to look at them through your binos, you can get pretty dizzy. They're just so fast, and we consider them aerial insectivores. So they eat when they're on the wing. So they're eating while they're flying. So good job. Thanks everyone for our first round. Now we're going to get a little bit trickier. Here are our next birds that we can see along the Poudre River or around Colorado in general. So for this one, you can identify by left or right. You could say these are the same bird or different. You could say what family you think it might be in. But these are definitely a little trickier. And if we can't get it, I'll pull up some other pictures that I have that might make it a little bit more simple. Awesome. Good job, Pamela. So the left, she thinks, is a female red-winged blackbird, which this one can be a little tricky. So good job. And the one on the right kind of looks like an oriole. So we're probably looking at either the beak shapes here or the overall look that gives us the characteristics of what family it might be in. Let me pull up, this might help a little more. So those are actually pictures of the female, like Pamela was saying. Here's pictures of the males. That might help us narrow our identification down a little more. So a lot of songbirds, we consider, some of them, not all of them, we call it sexually dimorphic. And that's when the males and the females look different. And the reason for that is the females are usually a little more drab looking. a little more camouflage, because most of the time their job is to protect the nest and their eggs. So they want to make sure that they're really camouflaged. The males are usually the bright, the showy ones, because they need to attract those mates. So I think I would probably rather be a female bird, because you can kind of just, you don't have to worry about attracting anything. You can just kind of be who you are, and the males will come to you. So does anybody else want to give a shot to what species the one on the right is? We know that it's an oriole based on what Maria has said. Does anybody know what kind of species of oriole this one is? And I actually have not seen one yet, but I know they're around. They'll be making their way up. Nice, good job, Maria. Yep, this is a Bullock's oriole. This is the most common oriole that we'll see here in Colorado. There are others that we can see, but the Bullock's is the one that you can see near large cottonwoods, near the river or near some water. They're extremely beautiful birds. And then the one on the left is the red-winged blackbird. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with that beautiful call, or we've seen them along kind of a wetland area. I love red-winged blackbirds. I really like how the males and the females look so different. They can kind of throw you off a little bit if you're looking at the females. They kind of look more like a sparrow. All right, we have a couple more slides for our virtual birding. So here is another one. These could be 2 birds, it could be 4 birds, it could be 1 bird. What do you think? Type into the chat if you can identify these. And again, these are migratory birds, so they're making their way up into Colorado now, or soon, hopefully. So Laura says that there are 2 birds, 2 different types of birds. Nice, Maria. I like how you're really narrowing it down to family first. It's a really important skill to have when you're birding, is figuring out the family first, and that'll help you narrow it down to species. So there are 2 different birds. Nice, Allison. That is the beautiful Western tanager on the left. And I know whenever I see just the female and I don't see the male around, it takes me a little bit longer to identify the Western tanager, because on the bottom you can see the female. They are kind of just drab looking. And the one on the right, good job, Maria, that is the black-headed grosbeak. They're beautiful, beautiful birds. Maybe you get them at your bird feeders. They have that really big beak that allows them to crush seeds, where the Western tanagers, they eat mostly insects. So great job. Again, those are the males and the females. I like showing both because sometimes you get stuck on just looking and finding that beautiful male bird. But the females, I think, can be a little trickier. And I also think that they can be a little more fun to identify, especially with the more common birds. All right, here's our quick bonus round. So I threw in some birds that we could see along the Poudre River here, especially during spring and summer. So feel free to type in the number and the species or the family or the color. These are 4 different types of birds. And this is just our quick little bonus round before we wrap up this presentation. And also you can type in if you've been seeing any of these species recently. Nice, Pamela. She thinks number 4 is the Say's phoebe, which is correct. I've been seeing them around. I love phoebes in general, and the Say's phoebe is really cool. You'll see them a little more in like grassland habitats, and they're usually perched waiting to hawk insects. And usually they have like a little bounce of their tail as well. Good job, Maria. Number 2 is a lazuli bunting. I say lazuli. Some other people say lazuli. Again, tomato, I think. I learned it as lazuli. And I have not seen one this year, but I know they're around. I really hope I see a lazuli bunting soon. Yep, number 3 is the beautiful yellow warbler. You'll see these yellow warblers around in the summertime. The males have that red streaking on them. They're small yellow birds that are usually seen with kind of near water's edges, near riparian zones and willows. They can be flitting around getting insects. And does anyone know what number 1 might be? I've been seeing a lot of this one recently, and it's one of our earlier migrants that come through for this family. I wish I should have got a better picture that showed the backside of number 1, and then maybe you would have been able to identify it a little quicker. But don't be scared. It's okay to be wrong. I'm wrong all the time. It's okay to guess. If you're guessing, you're thinking, and that's great. I can feel the wheels turning in people's brains. Nice. All right, so this one, number 1, is a yellow-rumped warbler, and the yellow-rumped can be split into 2 different subspecies, the Audubon and the myrtle. And this one is the Audubon yellow-rumped warbler, or as I like to call them, butterbutts, because they do have a little yellow spot right on their rump. And these are great. These are warblers. They migrate through a little earlier. And some places you can see both Audubons and myrtles here in Colorado, and you can tell the difference. There's a couple of different identifying marks, but I always look at the throat to see those differences. And we actually get ones that breed both myrtle and Audubons and can be hybrids around here, which is always, you got to look a little closer for. So thank you all for that quick little virtual birding. Again, this is a great way to learn birds. Before you get out in the field, it gives you that kind of recognition. And these birds aren't flying away until I move the slide. So you have that little bit more time. When you're out in the field and you're birding, it can be a little more difficult to identify because you might only see a glimpse of that bird. They might fly away, or you might not have them for too much longer. All right, so we're gonna end this presentation, but I wanna say that birding, it's a skill. If you wanna get better at it, you need to practice and practice as much as you can. I feel like I usually bird a little more in the spring and the summer, and that's when I get a lot of my practice, but winter is also a great time to go birding. And the better you get at birding, the harder you will find it. One, because you're more aware of the birds around you, so you're seeing more. And 2, there's so many different birds, and once you start seeing females or young birds in the summer and the fall, and different times of the year, it makes it a little more difficult. If you'd like to learn more about birds, you can check out our YouTube channel. We've put all of our recordings of the webinars we've been doing this past year. They're all up on our YouTube channel. Really dive into different species and how to identify them. And I highly encourage you, if you've not done a checklist, which I know some of you have not done an eBird checklist, is to get out and try to do one this weekend. Try to go out there and identify and count some birds. This can be for just 10 minutes in your backyard to get used to the technology, or it can be while you're walking your dog, or it can be while you're going out birding with some friends. So that's your challenge this weekend, is to submit an eBird checklist. So this is just a slide that we always add, like Poudre River Fest. We are a nonprofit organization. Gifts from individuals like you attending this webinar, also along with businesses and foundations, it helps us fill a critical funding gap. And we can use your donations now more than ever. We are, getting through this pandemic, and I cannot tell you how grateful I am for the donations that I see that come through for our science projects and for our education projects. And it allows us, employees of Bird Conservancy, to continue the amazing work that we get to do with birds. So lastly, keep in touch with us. If this is your first program, we are still doing a lot of virtual stuff. Our scientists are based out of the Fort Collins office. Maybe you'll see them along the Poudre River birding at some point. And we do a lot of in-person programming still. So look on our website for any events that we might be doing, whether virtual or in person. So thank you so much for attending. That is the end of my presentation, and I hope you all get out at some point this weekend and find some birds in your area.
Awesome. Thank you, Tyler. We really appreciate it. A very informative and interactive presentation. So again, today is our first day of the 2021 Poudre River Fest. Our next live presentation is at noon. It is being presented by the Fort Collins Audubon Society, and it's titled The Poudre River Grocery Store Fuel Station and Home Sweet Home to Colorado Birds. For those that are here on the call, I'm actually just going to drop the Zoom link in the chat. So you're welcome to join us here in about an hour. We'd love to have you, but thank you again, Tyler. Thank you everybody for being here. And please visit poudreriverfest.org to see the full schedule of programming we have today and the rest of the summer.
Awesome.
Thanks
Thanks,
all.
everyone. Have a great day.